But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
All the second stage tanks now pressurized. Astronauts report it feels good. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
356. DEI with honor. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson.
Hello.
Huh?
Hello.
Oh,
Hello.
hello to everybody.
We never do that when we get introduced.
You've got
Yeah,
you've got a new name. It's Fuzzy Mike.
What?
Oh, God.
Fuzzy Mike.
How? Why? Explain
We're
yourself.
already confused about us. We don't need to add to it. But we are working with the Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, who is in the background, and we may not hear from him, but we're always happy to when we get to.
Thursday's supposed to be his day off, folks, but
I
he
know.
he recently decided to come in and help us on Thursdays as well.
Well, it's
Fucking-
because
fucking show
I
love
don't-
to
I don't
Brian,
have
man.
the-
Brian
Yeah.
works hard, man. Brian works harder
because
than
I don't have
any
the
of us.
setup to do the vertical chat, and I'm not in a position to put in the setup to do the vertical chat. So there you go. But we are going to continue our really messy slog through the feminist funding within the vast Department of Defense, and we're back for some more information about sexual misconduct in the military, because that's definitely the biggest focus that the military should be engaged in, and the billions of dollars that are spent ensuring that women can be in the military and without feeling uncomfortable or feeling groped or glared at or glanced at or any other type of sexual misconduct applying to them. Totally cost effective, guys. Totally cost effective. It's a big help. So we definitely should always have women in the military, because it's apparently worth the billions of dollars. I'm not kidding. Like, I'm going to go back to the previous page here, and this is just with a search for keyword sexual assault. I also did a search for keyword sexual harassment, and the company that we're going to talk about today, that came from that search. But let me see which page I'm on. Okay, so there's page 1 here of contracts, and these are just one-time contracts. There's also continuing contracts. That's what the 6 contracts, the IDVs are. And then there's also grants for studies on this, right? And it ranges from 21 million all the way down to the the bottom rung of this is that, well, they haven't paid anything out yet. And they're all these different companies. Like last week, we looked at Catharsis Incorporated, and the week before as well, where we were looking at what are they producing for these thousands of dollars. And these companies are getting chunks of money, 3,000, 5,000, 8,000, 2,000, just depending on what they were producing at the time for video content. And we discovered that the subject matter was not really helpful in fighting wars. You weren't going to prevent the enemy from taking over any areas or take over any enemy areas by learning about each other's pronouns, right? And the production value was not up to par, in my opinion, as a person who makes videos, for the money that was being spent on these videos. So this week we're going to look further in, but as you can see, this just keeps going and going and going, and this is page 1 of what have I got here? 8 pages, 9 pages of 100 items per page. Bottom item on this page is still almost $30,000 on the first page. So we're looking at quite a bit of expenses here. When I say billions of dollars, I'm not kidding. So let's see. We get into We End Violence, LLC. Can you imagine? Like just to start, this is the name of a company.
That's hilarious. It's hilarious. We End Violence. Or what does your homepage look like? Is it a bunch of fucking guys with huge muscles and like guns? We End Violence. How the fuck are you gonna? How do you propose to do that, kind sir?
Yeah, when I saw this, I was like, okay, we got to find out what these guys are doing. Because We End Violence LLC, limited LLC, by the way, for people outside the United States or people who don't know anything about business, it stands for Limited Liability Corporation.
Limited liability.
Yes. Apparently, if they fuck up the ending of the violence, they're not responsible for that.
How in the world do you propose that you're gonna do that? It's just laughable on the fucking face of it, right? Because violence, it's almost like they think that violence is something that is manufactured, and in some instances, yes, it is. But violence is mostly, well, I would say for a good percentage of the times when it does happen, it's unprovoked. It's random. You know, if someone does something to you that you didn't expect them to do, and your reaction is to respond in a violent manner. We're gonna end violence.
The first act of violence is always unprovoked. Right?
Yes.
But that's pretty much the first act of violence is always something that the individual did that was not justified by the
Mhm.
actions of the person that they did it to. That's
Mhm.
always the case. Whether it's any kind of theft, whether it's any kind of assault, battery, beating on someone, engaging in some sort of violent sexual misconduct, imposition on somebody, it's always unprovoked.
Like what are they gonna do? Like pop out of the shadows with their end violence T-shirts and ba-ba-da-da.
We end violence. Well, we're gonna find out. So,
Well, they generally think they're going to end violence against women. They think they're going to end violence by men against women. And then you ask them, "Are you going to end violence by women against men?" And they go, "No, that
No, that
happen.
it doesn't
How
happen.
dare you?" And then for the rest of time, women are going to be aggressively, exceptionally violent against men, boys, I should say. And then those boys grow up to be violent because it was ingrained into them at an early age by the women who are definitely never violent. And then they go, "Oh well, yeah, we'll arrest and imprison all the men who are violent for no reason.
Yeah.
And it's just
Right.
this. They talk about the prison pipeline, but they never talk about the
Mother to
mother to son violence.
yes.
because they don't see that, and so they have a perpetual pipeline
Mhm.
because they're not interested in ending violence. They're interested in marginalizing and emasculating men forever, which creates this perpetual pipeline of violence. I
Yeah.
wonder if that's what we're going to encounter in the following episode. Stay tuned, folks.
Yep, we will find out. But before we actually get into this, and we will, we do got to do what we got to do. So here you go. As
I
always,
was doing what I was gonna do.
I know. Well, I gotta say this. It's very important. Otherwise, people won't know. We do have this kind of discussion all the time. We have a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions. Sometimes it's about stuff like this. Sometimes it's about stuff like female incels. We were one of the early talkers about the female dating strategy back before they privated all their shit because they were embarrassed to admit that they were female incels. And we did several shows on that topic because this was a new thing at the time. But yeah, we have discussions ranging from what's the government doing to men, or what's it costing men when the government does things uniquely for women and excludes men, to history. We did a whole series on suffrage and the evolution of voting rights in Western culture, particularly that which was influenced by English common law as different colonies of England became countries. But yeah, we've had a broad variety, no pun intended, this time, of discussions. Talked about intimate partner and sexual violence. Talked about the history of political correctness and how it has been used to kill people. Just a rather broad variety. But as experiences, both recent and long past, have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. And in light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out, because we're not going to cancel ourselves. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, especially certain ones that take your tips and don't give them to us, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, we'll get back into this.
I have a personal tip jar. Please give me lots of tips. I need to go to America soon, and it's
There we
gonna
go.
fucking bankrupt me.
Well, you have to actually tell people how to get to your tip jar.
Yeah, everyone, we all have different tip jars. Like, if Hannah says something you like, you can give her a tip. If I say something you
do?
like, you can give me a tip.
I
So,
didn't know about that.
I think so. I think that's how it works.
Well, I know that you can. There's some way to designate things for Mike, but I don't think I did. I think I opted out of that.
I don't know either. I have my own PayPal, but I'm not here to
Yeah.
shill that. That's for
Oh,
my.
okay. Well, in any case, Dr. Randomercam's channel, Mike is Dr. Randomercam, is actually listed in our low bar among the different channels. Mine is too, but I kind of switched everything I'm doing to Honey Badger Radio, so I don't think I've put anything up on my channel in years because there
Yeah,
really wasn't anything I
Hannah
wanted
put her
to
money
put
where her
in.
mouth is because YouTube is a den of pedos.
Yeah, I really
She's
have
stronger
been.
than I am. So a long time ago, she said, "Fuck YouTube, it's a den of pedos. I can't be bothered with it." And I'm not that strong. I can't, I can't exist without this den of pedos. I'm very sorry.
And I don't have a tip jar, so if you feel like giving me a tip, give it to Mike
There we
because
go.
he needs to come to America and he will be
Yeah.
staying with me.
I do.
And
And then I
yes,
will tip
Every
Lauren.
single one of us wants Mike to come to America. So there we go.
yes, we
We
all.
just don't want him to go home.
Yes, that's the
Like, we
problem.
want this to be home, but we can't do that yet. So
I
Yeah.
feel like it already is. Just legally
Yeah.
it isn't, which is a shame.
Mm.
Yep, that is the situation.
Don't you have what is it, 5 million for the gold pass?
There we go.
Trump's go what the hell is he calling it? Oh, it doesn't matter. Anyway.
All right, so we are going to get into this weird ass shit that we're discussing today. So, like I said, we've been on the topic of DEI funding in the military and the funding for, in particular, sexual assault prevention and sexual harassment prevention, and how DEI gets shoved in there. And like DEI is one of these things that has sort of always been intertwined with feminism. Feminism's always been intertwined with the progressive stack. The history of that goes back to sort of the split between something called gender feminism, which goes off more toward radical feminists that um, then have another split into radical feminists and trans exclusionary radical feminists. And then the other side of the split off from the other branch besides gender feminism is called intersectional feminism. And intersectional feminism is basically feminism plus cultural Marxism, which is not the same as like Russian communism or Chinese communism. Cultural Marxism was something that was it evolved or was invented, created, built, whatever you want to call it, in the United States by refugees from communist countries that brought their communism with them for some stupid reason and dumped it all here. And for some reason, it went from being about class issues to everything is a class issue. Race is a class issue. Sex is a class issue. Religion is a class issue. If your chewing gum loses its flavor on the bedpost overnight, it's a class issue, and that's cultural Marxism in a nutshell. So when you hear discussion about the progressive stack, when you hear discussion about victim narratives that involve past oppression and past privilege, and the idea that current circumstances of people are affected by that and they deserve some sort of recourse or reparations or need special treatment under the law, and other people deserve special punishment under the law. That's all intertwined with intersectional feminism. They just sort of melted that all together and made one big gay ass statue out of it. Um, and fake and gay. The whole thing is fake and gay. But it's very, very lucrative. Incredibly lucrative. And so what I just showed you a moment ago was, and again, this was just under the topic of sexual assault prevention. There are other companies that come up in the search for sexual harassment prevention, like this one, that don't come up under the search for sexual assault prevention. And if you search other aspects of sexual misconduct, if you go directly to rape prevention, or if you search more specific terms in there, like specific subtypes of sexual assault and things like that, we've gone through and looked at companies that came up because we searched masculinity, for instance. And even some of them even came up with toxic masculinity. So all of that has been very, very lucrative. And it's not all from the Department of Defense. They got feminists have gotten USAID money, USAID's. The humanitarian initiative veil infection that results in USAIDs. But they've also gotten money from the agricultural department, believe it or not, from Health and Human Services Department, from Homeland Security, from the Justice Department. They got a shit ton of money from the Justice Department. But now we're looking at the Department of Defense because there was this hue and cry that removing DEI policy from the military would end the military's rape prevention programs. So of course we had to figure out, what does that have to do with DEI? Because rape is something that can happen to anybody, and it's something that either sex can do. So there shouldn't be like any need for DEI in a policy for that. It's just about boundaries and not violating them and consent and making sure you have it. So why would they need DEI? And as we found last week, it's because it's an opportunity to talk about your pronouns. And it's an opportunity to make $5,000 for a video that is just somebody standing up against a background and talking without any special editing or graphics or anything being added to the video. So over the years, this company, We End Violence LLC, has made different amounts, different years. There's some of it's been small potatoes, but then in 2018 they got 20K, and then it like drops back down to 7,500 in 2020. We haven't seen anything. They haven't done anything in the last few years. So this is one of those companies that had contracts in different years for different things. The contract I had open here, the description is, this order provides sexual harassment training support for the whatever that designation is, sexual assault prevention and response office. And so I thought, well, what exactly is that they're getting these awards for? And I'm looking, and again, they've had several. This is all We End Violence LLC, and each one it's very similar to Catharsis, like we looked at before. It's just little penny ante charges here, ranging between 2,500 and 7,500, except for that one that was 20,000. Probably was a combination of charges in here, and it's different trainings: sexual harassment prevention, sexual harassment support for the SAPR office, sexual violence prevention training, guest speaker, more training, and presentation of Together. How does that come out of there? Let's see if I can move that over a little bit. Together We Can, sexual assault prevention. So I thought, wow, now I got to look at their company page. What do they look like as a company? What do they present to the public in terms of their services? And so I went to this. This is their main page here. We End Violence. And as you can see, there's a video of somebody giving a prevention or some sort of prevention training. I think that's actually slides because and there's numbers here. Yeah, this is all slides of somebody talking, people talking. And so it doesn't really give you a whole lot of, you don't really, oh, I found the word consent there. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they do. There may be a little more justification for some of the expenditures here, because if they're traveling to military bases from a location, well, then there's at least travel expenses involved there, right? And then I get into looking at what they have. And here we have lectures and workshops and training, 2 different pages. So I thought, oops, I pulled that off there we go. So that we could look at their little blurbs about this. And the first one that comes up is Together We Can, sexual violence, gender, and responsibility. And immediately, what do we have here? Topics: sexual violence, duh, that's what it says in the title. Socialization, language, gender performance, social change, responsibility to self and community. So, what is this about? Here is where the DEI sits. Right? Language will be about pronouns and will be about the way that you talk to people, the way that you different terms that you use when you're discussing these issues and so on. Gender performance is the feminist term for being feminine if you're female or being masculine if you're male. And they refer to that as a performance, something that you do by choice and not your real personality. And so they would differentiate between, say, I don't, according to feminists, I don't properly perform femininity because I don't wear makeup. I don't style my hair. I throw it up in a bun sometimes when I'm working. I don't run around in girly outfits all the time. But I am female, was born female, had a baby, I'm a grandma, and I've never identified as any other sex. Never had gender dysphoria, never experienced, like, I've been close to people who have experienced it, but it's not been my experience, right?
But surely you
So
have those options. Like a woman can still be female without wearing makeup
right.
or doing any of the oppressive, objectifying things that have been pushed upon women by the patriarchy ever since the beginning of time. If a man wears makeup, he should be applauded because he's not being masculine,
Yeah,
right?
that's
If a,
and
if a
we
man
hear
if a man
that.
dresses as a woman would traditionally dress, he gets points. But a woman a woman can either wear makeup or not wear makeup. She can either wear trousers or not wear trousers. It's I mean it
Depends on which feminist you talk to these days. Like,
I
back
mean
in the day when I was, growing up, I would have been like they would have thought I was uber feminist, because of that, and I'm not. Um, and, today, I get lambasted by younger feminist girls who think that, being ultra feminine makes them feminist, which is funny because the original meaning for the term feminism was just a synonym of femininity before, Fourier, changed it to mean the political movement. Like, he started using it that way, and then it became the thing that's how it got used after that. But, if you look in dictionaries from before his time, the term is just a synonym of femininity, and it doesn't have any political meaning at all.
and it what it sort of comes down to is largely narcissism.
Yeah.
It's wearing makeup and wearing revealing clothing specifically for attention is narcissism, and that's what men are praised for, um, because it's interpreted as feminine. But it's not as simple as that, because women are still considered feminine whether they do these things or not, because they're not uh, already damned by the original sin of being male. If males present narcissistically, then they are praised for being feminine,
There you go.
because implicitly that is considered feminine. But women can be as narcissistic or as autistic as they like, and they're still considered feminine as long as they don't advocate for men's rights, because that's autistic. That's unacceptably non-feminine. That seems to be the the linchpin, the point of gravity. If you just go along with the narrative and or you draw attention to yourself in pursuit of going along with the narrative, then that's good. We call it feminine, but that's what they mean by feminine. And if you are male in any way that comes across aesthetically or peripherally as male, i.e., if you don't give a shit about aesthetics or attention seeking, and in any way, if you advocate for men's rights, then you are not acceptably feminine. It's horribly complicated.
Yeah.
Because as I've often said, our entire civilization has been dominated and conquered by female narcissists. I guess I don't know what came first, the narcissism or the feminism. I don't
The
know.
narcissism goes back to 12th century. Feminism as a named political movement only goes back to 17 or 1800s. But the behavior of women agitating for social and cultural change on the basis of being disadvantaged basically by their legal status, that has a longer history, and it's some of it was just social change taking place because and we've visited this in other shows, but you had the cultural evolution of gender roles and how labor was divided and what legal rights people had and what legal obligations and responsibilities and expectations people faced. That all revolved around the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, wars between nations, migration of humans to various nations and so on. So you had this whole series of changes that's taking place. And initially, a lot of Western culture was centered around men being the shield as we evolved the concept of having a government and there being a nation and a state, that men were the shield between the rest of the family and the government. That it was government in authority over the people, and government had responsibility to the people, and the family spokesperson and also the family scapegoat, the family obligor was the man. And so as the spokesperson, the scapegoat, and the obligor, he had a set of rights that were unique to his position. And as things changed through our culture and life became safer and easier, more standardized in a way, experience became more standardized and so on. Then you had women start stepping up and going, well, we want the same rights that the obligor has, but we don't want the obligations. And we want the same rights that the scapegoat has, but we don't want the same blame. And
we
that's
don't want
what
to
feminism evolved out of.
and we don't want to achieve it through hard work and graft, largely because it's difficult to express these things other than through evidence of our hard work and graft. And so what we do is present ourselves as victims to show that we deserve these things because we look like victims. And unfortunately, a lot of men have adopted this idea that maybe we can look like vulnerable victims as well, and therefore we deserve those rights. Whereas if anything should give you rights, it's the hard graft. It's it's the work you put in to stuff. And like I was saying just now, simply showing a picture of a man dressing quote unquote like a woman, like wearing makeup and revealing clothing, but particularly an old ugly man, showing a picture of an old ugly man dressed in revealing clothing and makeup. You can just show that picture and go, look at this ridiculous person. Like, how can you take this person seriously? You don't even need to listen to them talking. You don't even need to listen to anything they say or retain any of their beliefs. You can just show an old ugly man dressed like a young pretty woman. I say dressed like a young pretty woman, but dressed like like young pretty women tend to dress. And they go, look at this ridiculous person. And I'm like, yes, but do we not have to conclude that it's just as pathetic when women do it? When women wear makeup and revealing clothing? A lot of people will go, no, it's fine when women do it. And I'm like, why? Why is it fine when women do it? Well, because we like the way women look. Okay, but why? Why? I refer you back to ancient Greece when it was men who wore the mini skirts, and it was women who wore the long flowing dresses. Like, I know it seems like perfectly normal that it's women who wear the revealing things, but it's actually not. It's just been normalized. And maybe if we're going to find men ridiculous, particularly old ugly men, for adorning themselves with this narcissistic attire, maybe we should also conclude that women are equally pathetic for doing this. It's no more normal for them. It's just that narcissism has been normalized in women. And I know that's really difficult for people to sort of come to terms with because it's become so normalized. But
Yeah.
that's
Well, and I think
what it's going to take.
I think that's why issues that are traditionally thought of as women's issues, even though uh, intimate partner and sexual violence are perpetrated by both sexes and experienced by both sexes, they have been traditionally thought of as women's issues. Those seem to have been the vehicle to sort of slide this DEI shit into military training. And it's one thing for the military, like the military's had to address, just like universities have had to address, any place where there are young adults, people who are getting out of the public education system and going on with whatever it is they're doing in their lives, have to deal with among like the 18, 19, 20-year-old set. Hazing is a problem, and it's always been a problem. um and it's not always as innocent looking as the paddling, and I think it was Animal House. Thank you, sir. May I have another? The guy has to say that every time he gets hit with the paddle. Sometimes it has been really dumb. I think I mentioned in a previous show we had a dumb one that they did at my university when I was in school, and this was back in 1992. One of my friends got engaged, and they had two different ways of hazing people for getting engaged. The guys were thrown into a basically a mud pit. The university had a little wooded area, and there was a little creek, and there was an area where there was runoff from the creek that made sort of a little wet area that I don't know. People used to call it part of the creek, but it was like a little 2 or 3 inch deep. Sometimes it would be as deep as a foot if there was a lot of rain. Um, area in the woods, in which you don't want to throw somebody into that because you can't see what's on the bottom, but they did. And then the I think they even called it a swamp. The gals didn't do something like that because that's messy and nasty and gross, right? So they would fill a bathtub. There was a bathtub on the fourth floor of one of the dorms, and they'd fill it with ice water and throw her in. And my roommate and I had a fit about this. You cannot just throw somebody into a tub of ice water by surprise like that. You can cause somebody to actually have a heart attack doing that, especially if they have some sort of flaw in their heart. But so we like, and we couldn't stop them physically. We found out as it was happening, so there was no going to an authority and saying, hey, they're going to do this, stop them. But fortunately, my roommate was an EMT, and so she went rushing up there and made sure the girl was okay, and then gave everybody what for over it, in no uncertain terms. And I don't think that our group did anything like that again. I left for another school because I couldn't get the major that I wanted at the university I was at. I changed majors at that point. But that's, hazing does take place in weird ways. Sometimes it can be really, really inappropriate and really get out of hand. And people do stupid things, talk somebody into drinking way too much, and they develop the level of alcohol poisoning, because being drunk is an early stage of alcohol poisoning. But when you get to the later stages, you start to show symptoms of irreversible damage, or damage that's currently life threatening as it's happening, and things like that. And those kind of things happen in the military just like they happen at universities and on job sites and all that kind of stuff. And so the military they were gonna have to deal with that. And a lot of like male on male sexual misconduct in the military, when you look into the incidents, from what's been explained to me by people in the military and from what I've been able to find documented that is public, is hazing, not the usual like what you would get complaints from women about normally, where there's pressure and force used and so on, to get a sexual result just for sexual pleasure or domination or meanness. It's between guys a lot of times, like that does happen. It's not a zero, right? But among guys, the majority is more hazing that's gotten out of hand or that's hit an inappropriate area of behavior. But I look at this like this together we can thing, right? They could do a topic like this and teach people that don't understand how to navigate boundaries, interpersonal boundaries, or they're socially awkward or whatever. They could teach them everything they need to know to protect themselves from being sexually assaulted or sexually harassed, and also to be sure that they're not engaging in any kind of sexual misconduct themselves, that everything that they do comes across the way they intend for it to, and not they're not doing something that they thought was okay that isn't, right? They could do all of that without talking about pronouns and without talking about gender identity or gender performance. None of that is necessary. All you have to talk about is bodily autonomy, the right to self-determination, and recognizing that other people have boundaries that you have to navigate as well, and different comfort levels and stuff. None of that requires DEI. The thing that really struck me on this page, though, was the second one, right? So, and this is another one. DEI is how to put this. DEI is a sort of branching off of the feminist victim narrative, and it's also the feminist victim narrative is sort of branching off of DEI. Both of them have the same idea that there is a background of an oppressor class and an oppressed class, and both of them have the same idea that whenever there is a violation of human rights or a crime committed between two people, the person who committed the crime, how culpable they are depends on how close to the oppressor class they are versus how close to the victim class they are. And the victim, how much compassion they deserve depends on how close to the victim class they are versus how close to the oppressor class they are. So if you have somebody who is a victim of a crime, and the victim class perpetrated the crime. A member of the victim class perpetrated the crime against the victim who is a member of the oppressor class. Feminists and proponents of DEI will have more compassion for the perpetrator and less compassion for the victim. And it makes no sense, but it is how they behave. And at the same time, they'll translate or generalize perpetration by members of the oppressor class across the oppressor class, whereas they'll treat perpetration by members of the victim class as individual flukes because they're the victim class. And that's what they do with men and women. So we have the idea of rape being a strictly male perpetrated thing is it's mostly based on if you don't arrest people for a crime when they commit it, they don't get into the statistics, right? If you don't treat the crime as the same crime when a particular group of people commits it, they don't get into the statistics. So historically, the rape was defined as something men did to women. And when women did the same thing, say forced coitus or performing fellatio on some guy when he's passed out drunk and you didn't get his consent, those instances are not counted in statistics. So feminists will look at those statistics that don't count instances of perpetration by women, and they'll say, well, see, these statistics show that rape is 95% male perpetrated, right? And that's then when you start talking about, well, here are studies that show that women admit to doing these things. Well, it's not the same because they're part of the victim class. And so they end up never acknowledging that these crimes can happen to men. They do happen to men. Women can do them, and women do perpetrate. And they perpetrate in much larger numbers than people realize. Men often don't report because they don't get taken seriously because they are part of the oppressor class, according to the DEI narrative, the feminist DEI narrative. So, of course, then they don't get any recourse. The statistics continue to falsify the actual rates of perpetration, and the problem never gets solved. And then we have this class, men against rape, off the bench and into the game, which makes it sound like this really, this is a bro class, right? And we're gonna talk between bros about this rape shit. You can't be raping the women's. Topics include sexual violence, masculinity, male responsibility, bystanders, creating dialogues between men, and activism. And so what is the paragraph here? Sexual violence is primarily perpetrated by men, but most men are not actively engaged in ending it. This lecture helps men understand the causes of sexual violence and their crucial role in its prevention. This lecture is particularly valuable for helping men find ways to engage in productive and satisfying dialogues with other men.
Men are most definitely actively engaged in preventing it the moment they see it. For instance, on the street, all manner of experiments have been performed, experiments that would be called pranks nowadays. We'll see it when a man assaults a woman in any way in a public space. Every man within half a mile's radius will come to her aid. The same cannot be said for when a woman assaults a man in any way. In fact, the majority of the women and the men in the vicinity will be like, oh, yay, good for her. He must have done something to deserve it.
Yep. Well, and if you look at what have men historically, throughout history, what have they done to prevent rape? So let's start with the fact that even before the 13th century, rape was a crime. Okay? it was in English common law, it was a crime to the degree that there was even an age of consent where, you had forcible rape as a crime, and then you also had it acknowledged that there was a point at which a girl is too young to consent. And the crime was listed in various ways, various times, in a variety of ways of saying carnal knowledge of a woman against her will. In other words, any sexual assault on a woman was considered rape, whether it was coitus, whether it was forcing her to perform fellatio, whether it was forcing cunnilingus on her, anal sex, anything you did to her was considered rape. And there were points in history during which it was a death penalty offense to rape a woman in England, in English, under English common law. There was no such equivalent if a woman tried to rape a man or a boy. The community might rise up against her, but there wasn't a law. There wasn't some sort of designation, and it wasn't under rape law. And to this day, today, right now, this very minute, in England, if a woman forces coitus on a man or a boy, or forcibly or taking advantage of a state of incapacitation, performs fellatio on him, or uses him for cunnilingus against his will or without his consent, she cannot be convicted of rape, even if she penetrates the guy with a device or her fingers. She cannot be convicted of rape because the law specifies only when a penis is used is it rape.
Yeah, I've lost count of how many British people have told me when I get into this argument, did you know until 1993 it wasn't a crime for a man to rape his wife? And I have to hold my head in my hands and sigh and fucking breathe in and out for a while before I say, do you know, to this day, it is not a crime for a woman to rape her husband, or any man, or any child. It is not. It is not a crime for a woman to rape anyone. It is not on the books as a crime. Sexual assault is the worst with which she could be charged. And
but I mean, for crying out loud, you just defined, what is a woman? You just put it on the books now. And it's so backwards that you have these laws that say that women can't rape men, but you didn't even define what a fucking woman is until 2025. It's just
well, and then the other thing is feminists will say that. They'll say, "Oh, but until 1993 it wasn't a crime for a man to rape." Well, it was a crime. It was not labeled rape. But when you point out that when in 2025 it is not labeled rape when a woman does it to a man in the UK, well, it's still a crime. Right? If a man forced himself on his wife in any state in the union, which is where they talk about this, because they're citing a Michigan law that created a designation for marital rape. It was still battery. It was still considered wife beating. If she came into the police station with bruises and said, "My husband raped me," they might not charge him with rape, but they would still charge him with wife beating because she came in with bruises. And so she still had recourse. But, a guy who is assaulted in the UK, he doesn't have the same recourse as a woman who is equally assaulted. And there are several other countries where this is the case. In India, you can't charge a woman with rape. And I believe in Israel, you can't charge a woman with rape. A woman can be charged with other sexual offenses in those countries. but the word rape is not used. And if people argue that it's not a big deal because the designation doesn't matter, it doesn't have to have that label, well, then fine. Let's take the label off the books and make all sexual offenses that involve penetration or potential reproductive actions, just call them sexual assault and give them all the same penalty. Well, then women get upset. No, we want it to be called rape because we want the stigma to follow the rapist for the rest of his life. But they don't want that to happen to women, right?
And none of this is to say that if you do live in a state or a country where a woman can be charged with rape, that doesn't mean that you're able to attain justice, because it's still, it's up to the judge and or the jury to define this. And if you think you're going to get equal treatment as a man, you're fucking dreaming.
Yeah.
It's still up to the court of public opinion. I mean, it ought to be up to the court of the actual court, but that court is still, under the general jurisdiction of the court of public opinion. And if they don't think that this woman raped you, all that happened was unwanted penetration, then that's all that happened. So, changing the law is only the first step in actually getting justice for men and indeed boys who were absolutely raped by women in all manner of circumstances, especially the boys who were raped by women. Because how are they going to make their case in court? Particularly the boys. How are they going to make their case in court in a way that any given judge is going to actually listen to them? I don't even want to get into it because it's a horrific line of argument to make, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, it's what happens is you get this vicious circle, right? So you have the law doesn't treat the crime the same when a woman perpetrates it as when a man perpetrates it. The training for people who are enforcing the law or working the judicial system then also doesn't treat the crime as the same crime when a woman does it as when a man does it. And this is the same in the military. And you can see in this trainings, men against rape, man up, masculinity and popular culture. You don't see anything about female sexual assault, right? Even though per capita, women are actually engaging in pretty close perpetration. And out in the rest of outside of the military, there's more statistics that indicate that women may even perpetrate more frequently, especially when it comes to the before you hit the level of sexual penetration and stuff like that. Women engage in significantly more harassing behaviors and pressuring behaviors and stuff like that.
Women should be concerned about this too, by the way, because particularly in the UK, there's no such thing as a woman raping a woman.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what a woman does to him, and we know what, we have some inclination as to what lesbian relationships are like. According to the available statistics, they're far more violent even than heterosexual relationships, never mind homosexual male relationships. As far as the statistics bear out, they are the most violent relationships we know about, and that's just in terms of fucking punching each other or attacking. It's usually one person attacking the other, and you have to wonder.
Each other. They have a big
you have to wonder how many lesbian relationships involve rape, but it doesn't get called rape because it's not recognized as a crime in whatever country or state you happen to live in. So we don't even have the necessary statistics as to how much rape goes on in lesbian relationships because our government doesn't call it rape. I
Well,
hope
when
they
they
do one day, so we can get hold of some semblant,
yeah,
sapient statistics.
when the government does research on this, like the NISVS, they lump rape, violence, and stalking, intimate partner violence and stalking, all in together when they do gay and lesbian relationships. And part of it is because the sample size is much smaller than the hetero sample size for obvious reasons. The population of people who identify as not heterosexual is much smaller than the population of people who do identify as heterosexual, and it's historically, if your sexuality doesn't include actions that are going to lead to reproduction, it's more likely that you're going to be in the smaller population than the bigger population. So I mean that makes sense, right? Um, but it does make it difficult to assess those statistics. And when I asked for those statistics, back when I was looking into the NISVS 2010 numbers and I think the 2012 numbers, um, they really had a rough time providing me anything. And when they did, they tried to tell me how to use them, what I could and couldn't do with them. They made me take a phone call when I got these numbers. They're like, "We won't release these to you until after you have this discussion on the phone." So I asked them some questions because the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, the NISVS, that they use a definition of rape that excludes female perpetration against male victims. Specifically, they define rape as being forcibly penetrated, but they define being forced to penetrate or forcibly enveloped. They called it forced to penetrate as other sexual offense. So they didn't define that as rape. So all the men and boys who reported having coitus forcibly performed on them by a female perpetrator, their experience didn't count in the rape statistics. So when you see that 1 in 33 number that they promote from the NISVS, that's the men and boys who reported having been penetrated in the course of a sexual assault, which basically either means somebody forcibly inserted something into their mouth or into their anus. Hopefully not anywhere else. But in any case, I asked why they excluded being forced to penetrate from the definition. And there's a recording of that phone call. Trying to remember the name of our video on that. This is an old video, and I don't think it's on our channel. I think it's on Allison's channel. It's like men's rights versus feminist rape culture. I'm gonna find it. I think it's explained using puzzle pieces. So yeah, it's men's rights versus feminist rape culture explained using puzzle pieces, and it's on Allison Tieman's YouTube channel, and it is from 11 years ago. So this happened a while ago. And we've been doing this for a while. I keep telling you guys that. And halfway through the video, like she does a whole thing demonstrating the ridiculousness of calling it rape when one sex does it, but not when the other sex does it, using puzzle pieces. And then at the end of it, she played that part of that phone call because I let her listen to it, and the two of us were talking about just how insane it was. They did not know why they used that definition. The researchers responsible for gathering the statistics upon which it like all legislation, future legislation and policy in the federal government regarding intimate partner and sexual violence would be informed, did not know why they were using the definition that they were using. You have to think about that for a minute. They didn't understand the research they were doing. And they didn't understand what statistics they were gathering.
They're just following the science.
Yeah.
The science.
Just what on earth? And how much are they getting paid to do that? Right? That's and that is what we're dealing with in this type of this type of funding. So but yeah, with regard to lesbian violence and everything, it being assaulted by another woman could be traumatic in ways that are very different from being assaulted by a man. And it's part of it is, you think you have some equality of capability against a person who is the same sex as you are. But a person generally doesn't attack you unless they think they're going to win. Right? My female attacker was I had been sick. We were 12, and I had been recovering from an illness from a mosquito bite. I had encephalitis and was in the hospital. Almost died from it. And actually, there was one other kid. There were 11 cases of it in my county that year, and there was one other kid, and that kid did die. So this was really I had gotten down low enough in body weight that my doctor was concerned and put me on a weight gain diet as a preteen, which is not a normal kind of experience, right? As a preteen. So I was physically beaten down and overpowered, which is what people think happens when a male perpetrator does it. And sometimes that's the case. But I had two different instances of male perpetrators, and one of them was a molester, and the other instance they used a gun. They weren't messing around. And honestly, the most traumatic part of that was fear of the gun going off, because that's the totally different. You're going to die in that instance, and it's going to hurt really bad. So the violence was more intimate in the experience with a female, and more personal.
I remember
it's something I don't know if you haven't experienced that type of personal violence. It's hard to explain, but the least traumatic aspect of it was that it was sexual. The most traumatic aspect of it was the violence and the personal nature of the domination and being subdued against my will. Not that there was any sexual anything going on, even though that was supposedly the defining feature of it. I guess that's about as clear as I can make it.
I remember seeing a story on Twitter very recently about another country that's considering castrating pedophiles and sexual offenders in an attempt to deter such crimes, because as long as you don't have a dick or balls, that's going to prevent you from sexually assaulting someone. And I'm like, a lot of the time, the reason people do this is just pure sadism. Like, a lot of sexual assault doesn't even happen for direct sexual gratification. It's indirect. Like, a lot of these people are so sick that they do it just because of the pain that they know it will cause. I mean, for instance, castration as a punishment isn't going to stop female perpetrators of these things, because there's really not much of an equivalent of castration. You're not going to cut out their ovaries, are you? You're not going to cut out whatever else it takes. And that just blows people's minds, because how would women wouldn't even do this? Yes, they would. They would do this to males. They would do this to females, not because it gives them a tingly in and out sensation in their own genitals, but because they get off on the sadism. It's not going to stop men from doing this. A man could get out of prison after 20 years with no dick and no balls, and it's not going to stop him from performing these sadistic acts on anyone who happens to come into their vicinity, nor will it stop women. And it's
Yeah.
people keep bringing this up like it's gonna prevent these psychopaths from performing these acts. No, it's not. It's certainly not going to do anything to prevent these female psychopaths from performing these acts, because for the most part, it was never about pushing something in and out of their own vagina. It was all they ever wanted was to push something in and out of their victims. And so punishing sexual offenders by cutting off their dick and balls isn't going to prevent any of these rapes. It's certainly not going to prevent women from performing these rapes, but it's a brilliant way of punishing or torturing innocent men who were in fact never guilty of these crimes. They were just accused of these crimes, perhaps by the government, perhaps by someone who wants to get rid of them in their own sadistic way. As again, it's punishing the crimes of sadistic women by being sadistic to men. And I know this is a very tricky thing to say, because it sounds like I'm defending pedophiles. I'm absolutely not doing that. I'm absolutely not defending perpetrators of these most heinous of sexual crimes. But threatening them with castration is not the answer. Death is a good answer. if you would just fucking hang these bastards and these bitches, that would be a deterrent that would actually be just as effective against female and male perpetrators. If you just fucking kill them, that would work across men. And well, it would work for women as much as it would work for men, which wouldn't work either, because they're fucking psychopaths, and to a large degree, they don't fucking care.
It's pedophilia is a mental illness in and of itself. It would be like if you executed people with bipolar disorder for having impulse control problems or mood issues, mood swings and stuff like that, you would still have new people turn up with bipolar disorder, and they would still have the same personality issues. You can't cure something like that by scaring people away from it. You can deter perpetration of crimes that way. You can even a person with impulse control can be scared out of robbing a bank or stealing from the grocery store or breaking into somebody's house if they have enough fear of the consequences. But you can't get rid of the mental illness through consequences, because it's not caused by a lack of consequences. It is itself often a consequence of a set of cultural issues that people don't like to trace back to their point of origin, because the point of origin is very often growing up without a father. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who grows up without a father is going to be a child molester or a bank robber or a burglar or even just a failure in life in general. But when you take someone's father away from them, you increase the chances that one of those things is going to happen. And you increase the chance that they're going to grow up in a violent and abusive environment, which increases the chance that they're going to grow up to be a violent and abusive person. You increase the chance that they're going to experience sexual violence as a child while growing up in a violent and abusive environment. And that increases the chance that they're going to be a perpetrator later in life. Just like when you expose someone to sexual violence as a child in an environment where they're otherwise very overprotected and they don't learn to defend themselves, you get serial victims. And even though I grew up in an environment where outside of my home in my neighborhood there was violence, I was overprotected in a lot of ways, and I ended up on that serial victim path. But my molester was an older boy, teenager, when I was in elementary school. Well, I was before elementary school actually, because I didn't start school till I was 6. Um, but he was violently abused by his mother, and he was taken from his mother's home, and he wasn't given proper therapy, and he wasn't properly monitored. The boy should never have been left alone with me for not even 5 minutes, because that's all it took. And the people that were running child protective services at that time didn't do what they needed to do for him to make sure he didn't go down that path of becoming a violent abuser. This was a child with brain damage. Like, he had been hit in the head with a metal ball bat. This wasn't a minor case. And what happened to me because those people didn't do their jobs. And as much as, you want to hold perpetration against the perpetrator in most cases, we are literally talking about an intellectually disabled child as a perpetrator. And I don't think you could hang enough people in the world to change what he was going to do. What he needed was to be institutionalized and very carefully worked with by people who could help him meet his potential as a human being as best he could under the circumstances that he had. What he really needed was to never have been left in the care of his mother in the first place, because she's the one that did that to him. Everything he did to me was stuff that she did to him. I'm lucky that he didn't do everything to me that she did to him. So this stuff is cyclical. And this idea of, well, we just take all the men and tell them not to rape and shame them as if they are potential perpetrators and challenge their masculinity and demonize their masculinity, talk about them being responsible because they're bystanders and so on, right? None of that addresses this type of cause. None of that addresses children growing up in environments that shape them into adults who live life in the stupidest way possible, who have predispositions to become cruel and dangerous and self-destructive in ways that are going to hurt other people in the process. Right? You can't shame the general male population enough to take the men and boys who have been warped by their experiences enough to violate some of the deepest taboos our society has, and not have the desire to do those violations be alien to them. You can't fix those guys by shaming other men. And those other men are already taking responsibility. They're supporting the politicians that pass the laws that say you can't do these things or we'll punish you. They're already, and those laws have been on the books for centuries. Women have been protected under intimate partner and sexual violence laws of varying degrees for centuries. And those laws were written by men. They were written by men, they were enforced by men, and the men of the community would enforce them, even if there wasn't a local law on the books, or even if there weren't police forces and such to enforce them. Women have always been protected. And there's always been some sort of recourse. The only stipulation has been, don't lie to us about this, right? Don't lie to the men and tell them something happened that didn't. Don't lie to the men and tell them it was worse than it was. Don't lie to the men and tell them somebody did it that didn't. And don't wait 20 fucking years to talk about it, because then we can't prove what happened, right? Very, very simple. Not a big ask, honestly. For a long time, there was also the stipulation you should try to fight back. Obviously, there are some circumstances where that's not an option. But in any case, what we're looking at here on this page, Men Against Rape, Off the Bench and Into the Game, where they say sexual violence is primarily perpetrated by men. Well, we don't know that because we don't investigate how much women do it. Our society does everything it possibly can to not see that. And when it does happen, it is reprehensible, just as much as it is when women are the victims and men are the perpetrators. It is traumatic to the victim, and it is usually caused by the same background issues of violence and a traumatic upbringing or a traumatic experience during childhood that doesn't get handled properly by the adults, so that the child doesn't get warped by it in ways that makes her violent later on. Similarly, we have down here the man up masculinity in popular culture. And again, we're looking at masculinity, gender, pop culture, representation. That's another DEI thing. Bystanders, social norms, cultural studies, discourse, critical thinking. The deconstruction of masculinity in popular culture provides valuable analytical tools for challenging unhealthy social norms. This lecture allows participants to engage in cultural analysis of how masculinity is represented and how that representation so frequently has negative repercussions in men's lives. And remember, this is in sexual violence prevention training, right? Sexual harassment prevention training. So this isn't a coursework on men having greater success in their lives. It's a classwork on claiming that masculinity is part of the problem where sexual violence is concerned. Completely ignoring, once again, female perpetration, and completely ignoring the fact that it's not masculinity that is the problem. It's childhood trauma and a dysfunctional upbringing and mental health conditions, right? People going down the wrong path, and when you get nothing but trauma and training that violence is how you get what you want, and violence is what you should want, you end up going in a spiral inward to more and more warped forms of violence rather than ever coming out of it. So none of this stuff is really preventative. It's just more of a shaming culture. And all it does is talk around the problem, right? When you look back at the conditions that create a rapist or a sexual harasser or stalker or groper or any person that approaches sex as a predator prey interaction rather than an interaction of human intimacy, that's an individual who didn't learn how to be a functional adult, and they did learn things that are not true about being a functional adult. Right? That's and when you trace back to the causes of that, more often than not, you find somebody who in childhood had a record, in childhood experienced abuse, in childhood was brought up without a father and without any father figure, right? In childhood may have experienced physical trauma that led to brain injuries. And in childhood, as particularly in the juvenile justice system, were sexually abused themselves. The majority of perpetrators, when surveyed, the majority of perpetrators of sexual abuse described having been sexually abused as children. And even though the majority of children who are sexually abused don't go on to become perpetrators, it's quite obvious that that is a causative factor, even if it's not the only one. You can't address this by shaming normal men. But that's what they're trying to do. And that's what our military is paying for. Thousands of dollars to shame our soldiers who are in the military to get their college paid for or to earn a living for their family. Most likely not, because they don't get paid enough. Or because they are patriotic, because they fear that some other country is going to actually harm their country, their community, their family, and they want to protect people for a host of reasons that have nothing to do with being predatory. And you shame these men for not stopping the men that our justice system has failed throughout their whole lives from committing rape, and you ignore female perpetration. You're not actually doing anything for the personnel in the military in that instance. You're actually doing harm. Yeah, the rest of this, let's see. Okay, cultural acceptability and stalking was another one, I think. Yep, there's another, you see another mention of bystanders. Victim dynamics is an interesting idea. There are some people who will not complain when they're experiencing something like stalking because they don't take it seriously. And there are times when it's really not something that you need to take seriously if the person is inept, or it seems like something they're going to do for a couple of weeks and then quit. But there are times when people don't take it seriously when they should, and they end up getting injured because it escalates into something else. So that's one that's actually useful. But when you get back to, they got to look at popular culture again. Here we go. I saw bystanders in here again. Victims suffer unique trauma and are often subject to other types of violence when it goes unchecked. This analysis examines representations of stalking and proposes practical tools for educating on this serious topic. Well, it's again very simple. The discussion should be about boundaries, right? And when you look at pop culture representations of stalking, one of the things to examine is the difference between fantasy and reality. Pop culture sometimes portrays stalking behaviors as romantic, right? When the stalker is very attractive and he happens to be the protagonist in the story, or when the stalker is really cute and she happens to be the manic pixie dream girl or whatever, right? But the fact is, if it's unwanted, it's dangerous. When we get into the next page,
As long as a stalker is paying the OnlyFans girl in question,
yeah,
perfectly fine.
stupid. Well, I mean, so I have seen some instances where and individuals that I knew who was dealing with who were dealing with an individual that was continually engaging in unwanted contact. We'll say, calling him on the phone. This was back when there were no mobile phones. Well, maybe rich people had them, but like your average household, nobody had a mobile phone. Nobody had pagers. If you had a pager, you were a drug dealer. I think that's pretty much the case now because doctors have cell phones now. They have their mobile phones now, so they don't need pagers. But yeah, you were either a doctor or a drug dealer if you had a pager, and everybody's landline, like your phone, you could have cordless phones, but your neighbors could listen in on your conversations if you used a cordless phone, right? So blocking someone's phone number was significantly more difficult. You could get if you got a phone call and you didn't pay for a device to identify everybody that called your house. You didn't have caller ID, and even if you did have caller ID, if someone was calling from an area that didn't have coverage, then you didn't have caller ID. So it was very difficult to prevent someone from contacting you, and it was difficult to know when the person calling you was your stalker. And then of course there was physical following and stuff like that. And this she really didn't take it seriously until she came home one day when her parents weren't home and he was in her house. And that was one of those situations where it was like, she was um reveling in humble bragging about how annoying this guy was. And so she wasn't doing a whole lot about it. She would whine about it and then whine about the obsession. But then when she came home that one day and he was in her house, suddenly, it was time to talk to the parents about it and get the police involved and everything. When in fact, a year earlier, she should have started with, "Hey, mom, dad, this is happening and it's a little bit weird." And yeah, the phone calls in the middle of the night, the parents should have taken seriously. No, it wasn't just a wrong number. No, it wasn't just a crank call. It was that dipshit again. And when that dipshit is calling 3 or 4 times a day, when it's not normal to call somebody that frequently, like today, you might see somebody getting dozens of texts back and forth. Somebody might spend all day texting. But back then, if your phone rang more than 3 or 4 times a day, you were really popular or really busy or you had a business in your home. It wasn't the thing that people did all the time, you know. Um, so yeah, it was definitely something that should have been taken more seriously, and it was very fortunate that no violence occurred as a result. Um, and I've run into this more often than not with female victims I've talked to, where they're like, "Well, men just do this kind of thing, and men just act like," and you find out that there's a personality type they picked that they got involved with, and then when they were ready to break things off, and he wasn't, instead of taking steps to put the kibosh to the stalking, they did that reveling in the victimhood and humble bragging about how obsessed this guy was that he wouldn't leave her alone, didn't file any kind of complaint, didn't go to any authority, just talked to their friends about it, and um, acted scared and upset when in fact they weren't really doing anything about the problem. I mean, we had when I was a kid, we had a boy who got my phone number and called me a couple of times and started, doing the crank calling thing. Wasn't obsessive, wasn't engaging in any kind of pattern or anything like that. Didn't follow me home, nothing like. My parents still called the cops. They still got law enforcement involved because you don't know, and it's not something that I wouldn't advise that today because at least not with kids because they go overboard now when they get involved. But it was taken seriously from the beginning, and something was done about it from the beginning. And the reason is because if you have any opportunity to reform a kid's behavior, it's when he's a kid. Best when he's a kid. But yeah, so this other page is when the previous page here. Back at the previous page and see what it says at the top. This is lectures, so this is where they go and they just talk. They might have PowerPoints. Workshops and training are a different story. This is interactive, all right? This isn't something just standing up on a stage and lecturing and everybody has to listen, and then when they're done, maybe they take questions and answers. This is like a classroom setting, and they may have handouts that everybody gets. You may have a quiz that you take. You may be expected to speak out and answer questions in class and stuff like that. And again, we're looking at not just the prevention of sexual assault, not just the prevention of sexual harassment, intersectionality of oppression,
What the fuck
classism,
does that even mean?
racism, heterosexism, homophobia. What's the difference?
Like, what's even the point in having the non-highlighted bits? Because every one of these sections starts with 10 different links to higher reading. It's like the stuff that isn't a link is just a formality.
Yeah. So do they have to teach people that your boundaries matter a different amount or in different ways if you come from a different country or your skin's a different color or you identify as something off the list of 72 genders that intersectional feminists invented and gender feminists won't accept? Like, is that what? Why do they even need anything before the discussion on? Here we are, sexual violence and victim dynamics. I'm not even sure they need to discuss victim dynamics so much as they need to discuss the topic of sexual violence and what it comprises and how to prevent it. Like really simple. This is really simple topic that people can easily understand, and most people already do, and that they overcomplicate with all this other stuff. So here's why feminists have been whining that sexual assault prevention training in the military would end if they took the DEI out of it. It's because they've padded DEI into every little thing here.
By the way, those of you who are calling anything the woke right, find me any of the people you accuse of being this. And find any of them talking about things like victim dynamics. Like, I don't know who we is, but for the sake of argument, if you're calling us the woke right, when have you ever heard us talking about anything like victim dynamics?
Seems like something you would talk to law enforcement about.
It's like victim mentality. Like we are constantly barraged with this academic fluff about victim dynamics, and we're like, this is retarded. that you talk about victim dynamics. Like, this is exactly what we mean by victim mentality. You actually do essays in academia, no less. You can do things that represent Mein Kampf, right, Dr. Lindsay? Regarding things like victim dynamics, and we go, this is bullshit that you keep talking about victim dynamics. And nobody does this on the opposing side. Nobody talks about the victim dynamics of white people or men or straight people. We just look at this kind of dross bullshit about the victim dynamics of women and non-white people and non-straight people, and we go, this is horse shit. And for that, we are called the woke right. Like, go fuck yourselves. All of you, go fuck yourselves. Sorry, I needed to get that in. Carry on, Hannah.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that. I mean, when I look at this, and I know the vertical chat doesn't see it very well. It's you're seeing like part of the text. But what I'm reading here, personally, as an individual who has suffered other people's sexual misconduct over and over again, because I did go down the path of being the serial victim till I understood the things that I was doing that made me vulnerable. And I know there are going to be feminists. You can't talk about that. You can't say that. You can't take responsibility for being vulnerable. Well, yes, yeah, actually you can. And it does make a difference in your life experience if you do that. A very positive difference, actually. In fact, I haven't been victimized in that manner since. So, if you're mad at me for taking responsibility for reducing my vulnerability, well, fuck y'all. Just saying. But yeah, I am really. I guess I'm just pissed off about this. Here, there is actually a problem of sexual misconduct in the military, and there's a problem between men and women. Then there's also the hazing issue among men, and there's a hazing issue among women, and it's often sexual too. And then there's also gay and lesbian sexual misconduct as well, and none of it is addressed. Everybody that could be protected from becoming a victim in the military is being done a great disservice by this focus on DEI instead of a focus on straightforward discussion of the issue and straightforward education on respecting each other's boundaries and respecting each other's individuality and respecting each other's choice, and respecting oneself enough to want voluntary intimacy and not a violent experience. And if somebody's in that situation where they want the violent experience instead, they should be getting told how to get help and not, well, we're here to teach men not to rape. Just don't do it. Hello, if they were going to just don't do it, they wouldn't need the education in the first place. And this goes through all of their, like, you have this one that has victim dynamics is not the one that's, there's a whole thing on sexual assault victim dynamics for law enforcement, right? But up here at the top, this is just a straight up, film viewing and discussion for Jeffrey, I believe this is pronounced Buchholz's Away from Violence. Maybe Buchholz, just depending on the nationality. Whereas down here, it's about for law enforcement. Finally, we see something that is actually of some value, right? victim dynamics, interview techniques, and working with victim advocates. The one thing that I don't like about what they're teaching law enforcement is treating victims with kid gloves in a way that can prevent getting all of the evidence, because you're trying not to step on trauma and toes and stuff. I'd rather have old wounds reopened and prove the case and get the result of a conviction and getting the perpetrator into a program that helps them turn their life around and not be that person anymore, than to have them not ask me questions because I might be traumatized by the questions. And that's what they're doing right now. Is don't ask this type of questions, or don't ask questions this way, or don't do anything that might make the victim think that you're challenging her story. Like I'd rather not be believed and have every aspect of my story dug into in a way that could lead to getting all the evidence needed to make the case, than not have the right questions asked. So we're looking at this again. We see there it is, eliminating gender violence and discrimination from our classrooms and campuses. So they're not just talking now about like social situations. Sometimes, just like any other work group, soldiers go drinking together, soldiers party together, blow off steam together, and so on. But this is like they all take classes together, they all do training together, they all do work together, and this is about that. So we're talking campuses and everything. Education, the topic: education, classroom discrimination, harassment, safe spaces. Safe spaces is another one that DEI stole. Safe spaces used to be um, like if you had a mental health condition or you had an addiction and you were trying to address a symptom, and the symptom is weird or it's socially unacceptable, um, that you could address the causes and the efforts that you need to make to overcome that without having the whole conversation focus on shaming you for having that symptom.
Safe spaces used to mean the domicile, just like your house. Like that was where your children were safe, and if you really wanted to keep your children safe, you would keep them there. And if you if you were okay with them leaving the house, you would let your children roam the street and play football and fucking hopscotch or whatever else. That's all safe space ever needed to mean.
To be, yeah,
It was your family home.
yeah. But in terms of psychology, when they said safe spaces, they weren't talking about turning your classroom, your whole classroom, into a space where nobody feels challenged and nobody feels excluded or anything like that. They were talking about being able to discuss your weaknesses. Like say you have an addiction to some drug, or you're an alcoholic, or you have a gambling addiction, and the craving for the thing that you're addicted to presents in ways that make it hard for you to resist that craving. And you have challenges that you're going through that you're describing in this room, and people in that room will share tools they use personally in their lives to help overcome the challenge of, but the craving hasn't gone away and I can't stop craving this thing. And the safe space is for you being able to say, but I desperately want to take that drink, or I desperately want to just play one hand, and I could stop, and I'm finding it very hard to resist that impulse. What do you do when this happens? What do you do when you're at a party and it's everybody's playing poker and you're a gambling addict? What do you do when you're at a party and all of the beverages are alcoholic? What do you do when the office orders wine for Christmas and sends it to your house and you're an alcoholic? Or things like that. What do you do when you're on a university campus and your friends have taken you to an event and it turns out that it's not what they thought it was, and the drug that you're addicted to is everywhere and people are offering it to you? And
And
and you can talk about that in a safe space where somebody will say, in my situation, I would call my dad, or you can call me and I will come get you, or other suggestions that they've made without saying, well, shame on you for not being strong enough.
and then the
That's a
government
safe space.
and then the government then the government makes the majority of drugs illegal in an attempt to turn the entire country into a safe space, and
Which
that
doesn't
doesn't
work.
seem to work. Like,
Yeah, that's because they flooded black neighborhoods with them and it ended up creating an entire culture that didn't exist. Um, and of course, now it's everywhere. But yeah, now safe spaces are, um, well, you can't use these trigger words. Don't say the word rape. Or we want you to say grape instead because that doesn't sound the same. I'm not doing that, by the way. I
rape,
hate
rape, suicide, suicide, Hitler, Hitler, COVID vaccines. Sorry.
even Hitler was human being. Okay, guys, don't rape Hitler. That's not nice. You find some other way to punish him.
You're
But
gonna have to find a graveyard in Argentina.
yeah, well, maybe he's got to be dead by now, even if he didn't die when they said he died. I mean, he'd be pretty fucking old, um, for a guy on the run. But just old. Period. But yeah, I hate the whole use of the safe spaces thing now because it's been ripped off, and it's been ripped off in a very bad way, and it's created an environment in which people actually, it does the opposite, right? You can't talk about the trigger issue. You can't talk about the weakness. You can't talk about how do you handle this challenge. How do you handle this situation? Because you can't talk about the situation. Can't talk about the addiction in front of an addict, right? You can't talk about the crime in front of a victim. Like, you'll notice I'm pretty comfortable with the topics of the things that are my past traumas. I might stumble a little when I talk about them and everything, but um I don't accept the idea that my perpetrators get to keep victimizing me for my entire life by making me traumatized every time the subject is brought up. I refuse to have that happen. I refuse to allow that. Today doesn't belong to them. It's mine and they can't have it. So there. Um, but it does a great disservice to everybody involved when you create spaces, like imaginary spaces. This classroom is now a safe space where the most important parts of the topic that you're discussing are off limits. But the shame and the blame are still there. It's useless. It's a waste of money, and we're spending millions, if not billions, doing this because of DEI. Instead of talking about uh, how to handle conflicts without violence when you're dealing with your own comrades, we're talking about gender normativity. We're talking about social status and social norms, socioeconomic status, race, disabilities, everything but religion, because religion is not a permissible topic, right? Intersections, intersectionality. We're talking about um, oppression, power dynamics. You know, we're talking about gender. We're talking about discrimination. And again, like this, none of this is necessary for discussing the specific issues at hand.
And if anyone has come to this channel because of past traumas they have at the hands of female perpetrators, I understand where you're coming from, and we are here for you. But I hope you're not here just to indulge in that trauma. We are here to talk about the legal issues and the socio-political issues that have landed us in this predicament. Revenge is not the answer. Like, I know it seems like there's nothing that can possibly free you from that trauma other than revenge, but it's not the case. It's never been the case. Revenge is not a virtue, it's a vice. So if you're here for the sake of revenge, I hope we can bring you to the other side where you can not quite sure how to finish that sentence, but you know what I mean. It's
Yeah.
Revenge is not the answer.
I have a
Retribution is
different
not the
idea
answer.
of revenge than a lot of people because of my religious beliefs. You know, even though I don't necessarily attribute human behavior to other entities. So, like, I'm not saying the devil made them do it, right? But I do recognize that when you think in terms of a creator and a destructor, because if you look at the descriptions of God and the devil in the Bible and in various other religions, um, good entities or positive entities, entities that are worshipped and loved versus entities that are hated or feared, there's always that. There's a creator and a destructor, and the destructor destroys for the sake of spiting the creator and hating the creator. And even in fictional religious histories, like if you read the Silmarillion, that same dynamic of harmonious creator that had all of life in harmony, and the disharmonious destructor that wanted to go a different way and was vain and angry that the creator didn't follow, and so took it upon himself to become a destructor. My view of of I don't want to say necessarily supernatural, because if nature is natural, then nature's creator is also natural. But for lack of a better term coming to mind, just think of it that way. Divine, whatever, good and evil. I consider it a great revenge against that which celebrates destruction. If a wrongdoer, a person who does great harm, a person who's lost and on that destructive path, gets removed from the path of destruction and is redeemed. That's a bigger revenge than anything that could be done to that person to get back at that individual for that behavior. To me, it's infinitely better. I can't even think of another number big enough to say how many times better if that person is redeemed and becomes a functional, nonviolent individual within a community, member of a community that can engage with their community just like anybody else, with a job, and maybe or maybe not a family, maybe or maybe not a social group, but somebody whose interaction with their community is at worst neutral and at best benevolent, beneficial, mutually so. Like that's the best revenge from my perspective.
they say the best form of revenge is success. Success for its own sake, so that you can succeed in life, and then you can rub your success in the noses of those who wronged you. But even that is even that is sort of living for the wrong reason, because success should be for its own sake. Um, if you're doing it for the sake of anything else, then it sort of means nothing. It means less than. It's contingent on someone else's suffering. The best
You don't
form
gain
of
anything from it.
the best form of revenge, if you even want to call it that, the best form of retribution, I should say, is to succeed for your own sake. And then when the person who wronged you turns up one day and goes, "Oh man, I can't believe you succeeded in life while I lost." The best thing you can say in response is, "Sorry, who are you?"
Yeah.
If you just forget, who it was who wronged you. And I'm not even talking about forgiveness, because that's what Jesus was on about. And yeah, I understand the advantages of forgiveness. Forgiveness is not is not to render the guilty innocent. Forgiveness is for your own sake, so that you no longer hold a grudge that ekes into your own psyche. But that's
Grudges
kind
are
of
heavy.
this is what I'm talking about. You should succeed. You should succeed for your own sake, so that you completely forget whoever it was who wronged you. So that if you ever do see them, you go, "Who the hell even are you? I don't even remember you. Doesn't matter anymore. I've moved on." And that's what it's about. It's about moving on. You don't find a future by fixing the past, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You just find a future for its own sake.
Yeah. I just my female perpetrator that I talked about, I got a chance to learn how she changed as she grew up. And there was quite a bit of reform there. And I happened to know her sister, and I had some conversations with her sister about, s- sort of finding out if she'd been victimized as well. And I learned that there was a certain point at which I had put a stop to what she was doing to me, because I got healthier, I got bigger, I got stronger, and I fought back. And that in and of itself was traumatic, but it was necessary, because I didn't have the pathways I should have taken to put a stop to it. And so I talked to her sister quite a bit about the situation, and about her personality and what changes had taken place. And that was pretty much when I developed my understanding of what the best revenge is. She's not even the same person anymore. Like, I can't imagine her doing something like that now. And according to her sister, the the person that she was at that time doing those things disappeared. It was almost like she flipped personalities and never went back to the old one. And so, not that that is a method I would use to cause that change in people on a regular basis. I'm sure there would have been better ways, but for me personally, that was a bigger victory than seeing someone go to jail, or seeing someone get beaten up, or seeing someone lose in life. Seeing her change dramatically, and never be that person again, like, that made a huge difference for me. It tells you there's still good in the person, and it's not, that person's not the monster under the bed. right? That person is a twisted child that can be untwisted and not be scary ever again. And there's just something more comforting about that than I got the idea of I got a little of my own back. Like I'd rather have the knowledge that that person's never going to be scary like that again. That person's never going to be damaging and dangerous that way again than to get a ton of my own back. I don't know. Maybe that makes me weird, but that's just the way I feel about it. In any case, we are at the 9 o'clock hour, so I'm gonna for at least where I am. I think I probably ought to call this. We don't necessarily have to go through every single one of these, but I think you guys get the gist that we're repeatedly seeing intersectionality in all of these, and DEI topics like gender identity and gender dynamics, discussion about oppression, power dynamics, and stuff like that. None of that belongs in this type of training. And the training can exist independently of that. So all these feminist groups that are out there lamenting that this type of training is just going to go away and never come back because DEI has been mandated that DEI be removed from it. They're full of crap. That's not the way things are. And I think that this can all be redesigned or streamlined to eliminate the unnecessary shit and just focus on what it actually takes to prevent this type of interpersonal violence among comrades in the military. Either you guys have anything else to add to that?
I think Lauren's asleep.
Okay. Yeah, that's a distinct possibility because Lauren gets up pretty early.
And I've said more than I probably should say.
All right. Well, in that case, I will just briefly show you next week. I believe this is the thing we're going to be talking about. One of these, yeah, I believe it's this one. Yep. So there's a couple of different research things that I found. Because when we go back to the original first page here, you'll notice that there are 13 grants listed on this page. There were also grants listed under the sexual harassment search. We paid American taxpayers for research into these topics. And we've paid for research into these topics over and over again. And the Department of Justice has done research. The Department of Health and Human Services has done this research. The Department of Education has done this research. And unfortunately, we've also spent money through the Department of Defense to do this type of research. So that's what we're going to look at probably next week. Unless something comes up that I think is more important to talk about right now, that'll be our topic. So with that, we have one super chow from Meredith G. She gave us $10 and said HBR Talk 356, honey for the Badgers. And I don't think we got any Rumble rants or super chats that I'm aware of. I did not see any super chats go by anyway. On the kind of was watching the restream chat and didn't see any. So I think that is it. Thanks everybody for listening. And this is kind of a gross topic, I know. It could be worse. There's other things we've talked about that are equally gross. We've done whole shows on the topic of abortion, for instance. So there you go. Whether you're pro or con, the actual procedure itself is pretty gross. But in any case, thanks for listening to it. Thanks to my two co-hosts for talking this out with me, and thanks to Brian for all your help. Like I said, I'm not at all set up to do the vertical stream. I'm the old person falling behind on technology where that is considered.
Hello to the special chat, by the way. I don't keep up with the special chat. Thank you for everyone who said special things in the special chat. I'll look at it later.
Yeah, there does seem to have been some discussion there. I missed a little more of that than I did the other chats. I'm watching 3 different chat windows though, so to be fair, while I'm talking and watching the other computer screen that has my subject matter. So there you go. But in any case, thanks everybody. Good night, all.
Word.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.